A very good morning to all. I welcome you to the webinar on saving the Asian vulture. I would like to tell that PGSC is organizing a series of webinars at the occasion of International Biodiversity Day, and this is second webinar of the series. So today we have with us the famous raptor biologist and conservationist Dr. Muneer Virani, Dr. Nilima Jairath, Director General PGSC, and Dr. Rajesh Grover, Director PGSC. Before I invite Dr. Nilima Jairath to give her inaugural remarks, I would like to introduce her. Dr. Nilima Jairath is Director General Pushpa Gujarat Science City. She is a double gold medalist and a state awardee for her work in science and environment. She has undertaken certificate courses in environment and sustainable development from International Center for Conservation Education UK, Smithsonian Institution USA, and Uppsala University Sweden. Prior to joining as Director General, Science City, she was Executive Director, Punjab State Council for Science and Technology, and founded Member Secretary of State Biodiversity Board and State Innovation Council, and has been instrumental in establishing the Patent Information Center, Climate Change Knowledge Center, NBIS Center, and Regional Center for Education on Sustainable Development. Pushpa Gujarat Science City received the National Award for Science Communication in 2016 under her leadership. I request Madam to please give her inaugural remarks. Madam, please.
Thank you so much, Loveleen, for your very kind words. A very good morning, Dr. Virani, experts from the Vulture Research Center, researchers from some of the universities in the area, bird watchers, foresters, teachers, and most importantly, our dear students. We all know that one of the most important services which are required in any ecosystem is that of the scavengers in the ecosystem. And vultures are one of the best known scavengers. However, in the past 2 decades, the population of vultures has decreased drastically. And one of the reasons which scientists attribute this to is the use of diclofenac, a drug used in veterinary science, which has been used indiscriminately. My friends from the Vulture Research Center had also told us that because of diclofenac, the eggshells of the vultures get weak. And so the eggs break even before the juveniles hatch. So there is a lot which needs to be done to protect our these scavengers in our ecosystem, most importantly vultures. People who are from the rural areas, you would know that all around we have playing grounds which are away from habitation, but there is a common playing ground for a number of villages in any rural area. And these playing grounds are actually areas where these scavengers come and stay and roost. But because of diclofenac, whatever has been happening, it has also been observed that animal dead bodies do not get putrefied as early as they used to be. It has been observed by epidemiologists that there is a direct relationship between the decline in vulture population as well as the incidence of diseases like rabies, etc., the increase in those diseases. Now, there are a number of efforts realizing this problem which have been initiated by the government. For example, certain vulture research centers have been set up, but at the same time, there are a few civil society initiatives also. For example, in the Shivalik area of Punjab, I wonder if some of you are aware of this or not, but in this area, there is a group of students who have set up certain areas in the forest which they call as vulture restaurants. Because in this area, they have earmarked that area, and with the help of the forest department, they bring the dead animals there. And in this area, they have planted trees which are suitable for vultures to roost upon. And it is an attempt to save the vultures in the area. Similarly, there are certain individual efforts also. For example, if you have heard about Orcha, Orcha is a place in Madhya Pradesh, which is near Jhansi, and it's a very famous tourist spot. There is a Orcha fort there, and most of these vultures, they actually like to live in secluded places. So near the Orcha fort also, there was a big population of vultures which was declining. So this is an interesting story of a small-time worker in the archaeology department of the government of India who was working on the Orcha forts, and he started protecting the vultures to the extent that he did not allow visitors to go to the top story of the fort when the vultures were in breeding season. So I think we need more awareness. We need more such initiatives. And it's not only for vultures, we need to do it for all birds of prey. Dr. Muneer Virani, our expert of the day, is an expert in this field. He is working on raptors, and he has some very interesting stories to tell to all of you, to share with all of you. I would request Dr. Virani to share those stories with our delegates about raptors and definitely about vultures as well. So, Dr. Muneer Virani, a very, very warm welcome to you from Pushpa Gujral Science City. It's a great honor and a great privilege that you agreed to speak on our platform. For the children, I would like to tell you, especially the youth, you must be hearing on social media talks by TED speakers. Dr. Virani is one of the TED speakers, so it's indeed a privilege to hear Dr. Virani today on the platform of Pushpa Gujral Science City. A very warm welcome to you, Dr. Virani, once again, and also a very warm welcome to all the researchers, experts from the universities, some very keen bird watchers, foresters, teachers, and most importantly, our students, as well as members of the civil society who have joined this program and who are, I can see, still joining this program. I hope you are going to have a wonderful experience today. And I would not want to come between you and our expert speaker. Please realize that it is already 10:30. He's speaking from USA, and it is already, in fact, almost 11:15 now for him. So I would like to hand the platform to Dr. Virani. But before I do that, I would request Dr. Loveleen to please introduce Dr. Virani. Thank you so much.
Thank you, madam. I take this pleasure of introducing Dr. Virani. Dr. Muneer Virani is Executive Vice President and Global Director for Conservation Strategy at the Peregrine Fund, a US conservation organization dedicated to conserving birds of prey worldwide. He graduated with first-class honors in zoology and was selected by the Peregrine Fund to train as a reptile biologist under the legendary Simon Thomset. Dr. Virani is a PhD in biomedical sciences and medicine. He is an experienced executive with a demonstrated history of working in environment, wildlife, and conservation. Dr. Virani has published more than 100 scientific and popular articles. In 2002, he was awarded the Aga Khan Foundation Award for Excellence in the field of science and technology. And he is a recipient of 2018 Whiteley Award. Now I request Dr. Virani to deliver his talk. Sir, please.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction. It's a real honor and a pleasure to speak to the Pushpa Gujral Science City and the community over there. I would like to recognize and acknowledge all my colleagues from the Vulture Center in Pinjore, people from the Bombay Natural History Society, WWF, everybody who's logged in and has been involved in the vulture research and across this journey. I want to welcome them and to let them know that they are also a big part of this entire process. So I'm going to share my screen and hopefully this will work. There we go. So I call my talk The Return of Jatayu, from Asian Vulture Crisis to Beyond the Brink. And I like to give it a bit of a positive twist just because, you know, there has been a success. A lot of talks and conservation lectures that I hear mainly focus on the doom and gloom. Everything is disappearing. But this is a real success story. And, you know, the Indian government and the partners, the Ministry of Environment and Forest, the Central Zoo Authority, WWF, BNHS, the Corbett Foundation, there are many, many organizations that have played a really good role, a vital role in bringing the vultures back from extinction. Just move to the next one. Vultures, as Nilimaji stressed earlier, these are without a doubt the most threatened group of vertebrates on our planet. This is a lappet-faced vulture. This is the largest vulture in Africa. And I put it over there because my colleagues and I have spent a lot of time working on vulture issues in East Africa. And one of the greatest positives that the vulture crisis in India and Nepal has brought is the ability to start focusing on vultures in Africa, because there's a whole different suite of problems that are affecting vultures in that part of the world. But this talk, I want to focus primarily on vultures in India and in Nepal, and to some extent the work in Pakistan. This is a schematic image of vultures across the globe. Vultures are divided into New World vultures, which are vultures that are found in North and South America. And there are 7 species that are there. And then in Africa, Europe, and Asia, there are 16 species of vultures. Now, 11 out of those 16 species are highly threatened, whether it's lack of food, whether it's veterinary drugs, illegal poisoning. There are other threats from electrocutions and wind farms, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So over the last 2 decades, there has been a lot of fuss about vultures. This is a Rupel's vulture, which is another long-distance flying vulture from Africa. A very beautiful bird. As you know, these are obligate scavengers. They feed almost entirely on dead animals. And Charles Darwin, in his journey across the United States on a ship, when he saw the turkey vulture, he referred to them in his book as very disgusting birds with bald scarlet heads that were formed to revel in putridity. Basically, he just said they were as ugly as you can get. But when he saw these birds soaring, he changed his mind, and he realized that they perform a very, very important role in our ecosystems, in keeping our wildlife and our cultures healthy. Many of you are familiar with the story of Jatayu and how Jatayu was killed by Ravan as he abducted Sita towards Sri Lanka. And the story goes that Jatayu raised the alarm and basically sacrificed his life to save Sita. Vultures have been ingrained in a lot of mythology and history as well. This is a painting on silk made by Mansur during the reign of Shah Jahan, during the Mughal Empire. And you can see how delicate and intricate the paintings are. There's a red-headed a king vulture on the left and a long-billed vulture on the right. You can also imagine during the big wars that were fought, during Mughal times, there were a lot of casualties and many people died. Elephants died, horses died, and vultures did really, really well. They had a lot of food, so there were no drugs at that time. So they were, their numbers really expanded. And of course, India is a country that looks at the cow as a sacred animal. And as cows drop dead, it's not eaten. So there was a super abundant food source for these cows, for these vultures. And so their numbers really, really increased. In places like Pakistan, with Islamic culture, if a cow just drops dead, nobody's going to feed on it. And so vultures did really well. As you know, vultures don't recognize international borders. So they fly across all these 3 countries, including Bangladesh, with relative ease. I want to take you to a place in Mumbai, up on Malabar Hill, which is the Towers of Silence. The Parsi community, some of these might be horrific pictures, but the Zoroastrian Parsi community, the way they dispose of their loved ones is by leaving them on the Towers of Silence. And the vultures would consume their the corpses. And in a way, in Parsi and Zoroastrian community, they do not want to desecrate the elements of fire, earth, air, and water. And so in their culture, and in some Tibetan cultures as well, leaving your loved ones for vultures to consume is supposed to help liberate the soul into the universe. These photos over here will give you an idea of just how abundant these birds were. There are estimates that are unconfirmed, but of approximately 40 million birds that existed in the triangle within Jaipur, Agra, and Delhi. There were just hundreds of thousands of these birds. It was Vladimir Galushin, in his paper of 1971, wrote that the Oriental white-rumped vulture was the most abundant large raptor in the world. And again, there were just hundreds and thousands of these birds. And then from the mid-1990s, Dr. Vibhu Prakash noticed in Keoladio National Park that vulture numbers were starting to decline. And this was mirrored all across India when people were finding dead vultures everywhere, and nobody knew why they were dying. It was only until 1999 when scientists really put their heads together, a lot of these from India, to try and really understand what the problem was. As you all know, vultures play a very, very important role by consuming carcasses and preventing the spread of bacteria or other pathogenic organisms that could spread to humans, to livestock, and to wildlife. The Peregrine Fund, the organization that I work for, was asked to come in the early part of 2000 on a fact-finding mission to see if there was a role for the Peregrine Fund to play. With a little bit of background, the Peregrine Fund was formed in 1970, primarily to save the peregrine falcon from going extinct. Our founder, Tom Cade, and his colleagues, by 1998, were able to take the peregrine falcon off the endangered species list. So the Peregrine Fund was considered an organization that responds to a crisis when raptor numbers are very, very small. We worked on the Mauritius kestrel. They were down to 4 known individuals, and there are now over 600 birds that are flying on the island of Mauritius. We work on other threatened species like the California condor that were down to just 22 individuals in 1987. Today, there were over 500 birds, of which more than half are flying in the wild and the other are in captivity. So we were kind of like, the Superman of the raptor world when these birds got to very low numbers. We realized that we had to change our strategy because we can't wait for such situations to occur. So our strategy has changed a little bit. So I was asked to visit India, and I had the honor of meeting Dr. Vibhu Prakash, Dr. Asad Ramani, and many of the kind of legendary raptor and ornithologists in India at the time. I traveled across Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh, West Bengal, and into Nepal and into Pakistan. And what I found was that vultures were dying all across. There was something that was killing these birds, and we didn't know. Eventually, we started our project in Pakistan just because it was easier to get permits over there. And also there were more vultures in Pakistan at the time. And I will come later and explain to you why that was the case. We were collecting dead birds. So my role was to set up a scientific and diagnostic investigations that we did in the Punjab province of Pakistan. We had students that were daily collecting vultures. Dead vultures we were finding on a daily basis. When we cut open the vultures to look at to collect tissue samples, we noticed that the internal organs like the kidneys and the liver and the lungs and the heart were covered in this white colored chalky paste. And that is uric acid. And basically, these birds were dying of kidney failure. And that was universal. Out of 100 dead birds that we collected, 85 of them were dying of kidney failure. And we just didn't know what was causing it. Of course, over 3 years' time, we were able to ascertain that it was diclofenac that was the main cause. This is common knowledge now. This is a poster that one of my friends put together, and we were able to distribute these all across places in Rajasthan, in Madhya Pradesh as well. That included Orcha as well. And, it was a real challenge. And to their credit, the Bombay Natural History Society and the RSPB and other partners in India were able to convince the Indian government to ban veterinary diclofenac for use in livestock. So 5 species of vultures, India, Nepal, Pakistan, the Indian subcontinent has got 9 species of vultures, of which 5 were severely affected. We have the Indian vulture or the long-billed vulture here, the king vulture, the slender-billed vulture, the oriental white-rumped. This was the most common one. And then the Egyptian vulture. These were affected, and their population had declined by over 99% over a very short period of time. This is a schematic drawing of what the decline looked like from what the computer model predicted and what biologists observed. Just by 2005, there were just a handful of birds, which was really shocking, because coming from Africa, where we have vulture populations at that time, there were various theories on why these birds were dying. Radioactivity, people suggested that birds were being shot by the airport authorities. Climate change may have been an issue. And there was also the possibility that this could be a virus that was spreading from east to west that might enter Africa and affect vulture populations over there. So biologists in Africa started to look at vultures there more carefully. And they also found large numbers of mortalities, but that was related to other causes over there. In 2006, with the help of a consortium primarily led by the Bombay Natural History Society and the RSPB, Prime Minister Manmohan Singh put a ban on diclofenac. And that was a huge feather in the cap of a lot of conservationists, because we didn't think it was possible, but it happened. And I think as Indians, you should be very proud that the Indian government took a stand and banned veterinary diclofenac. Had they not banned this, there would be no vultures in the sky. And a lot of credit goes to the hardworking people that really lobbied the government and the Ministry of Environment to get this done. So it's a big credit to the Indian government for getting this done. One of the impacts of the loss of vultures is that there were tremendous human health costs. in a study that was done by Markandia, they estimated that India, because of the loss of vultures, the number of rabid dogs just skyrocketed. And India was having to spend $1.5 billion every year just to treat rabies. And that is a huge, that is a huge expense. That money could have been used for many other things in healthcare or, infrastructure, agriculture. But you can imagine the loss of money that went primarily to treat rabies just because we lost vultures that performed very critical and vital ecosystem services. So my role at that time, after veterinary diclofenac was banned, as a scientist, we're always asking questions. So we wanted to know whether the veterinary diclofenac ban was having an effect on the vulture population. So we began surveys on the numbers of nests of long-billed vultures in Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. We also did surveys of Himalayan vultures in Nepal's Annapurna region. And I'll talk a little bit about a project that we're doing in Nepal with our partners there, Himalayan Nature, led by my really good friend of mine and a colleague, Dr. Tulsi Subedi. And then I'll talk a little bit about some of the other issues that are affecting vultures there. So this is the work that we supported in Pakistan in the southeastern part in Nagar Parka district. And you can see that in 2003, there were 250 breeding pairs. And by 2005, and just after, they got down to under 100. So they lost 50% of their breeding population over there. Now, diclofenac was banned at this time. And you can see that the population started to recover. But mainly it was stable. It's going to be a while before it gets to this area over here. And I doubt it will ever get there. Perhaps it will in the future. But at least the population did not crash all the way down here and they lost. So, diclofenac was banned. It was also banned in Pakistan and in Nepal at the same time. And so this is a very promising graph that shows that the population started to stabilize. We wanted to know if this was the same thing that was going on in India as well. We published those results, and then we started to focus our attention on these breeding colonies of the Indian vulture in Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. They were easy to study just because they are cliff nesting vultures and they have an affinity to go back to the cliffs. Whiteback vultures that nest on trees, sometimes they will move to go to other trees and they'll move and they will migrate and they'll go to other areas if the trees are cut down or if there's some disturbance. So it's very hard to go year by year with whiteback tree nesting vultures, but it was much easier with cliff nesting vultures because that is prime real estate. So we focused our work on the long-billed vulture, which is listed as critically endangered. This photograph was taken in Orcha, a wonderful place to photograph birds. And they are cliff nesting birds. They start to nest build around October and November every year. And by December, they have a nest that's fully made and either they've laid one egg or they're very close to laying. So my job was to come every year to count all the nests that had eggs in them or that were occupied. The term is you have an occupied nest around December, and then I would come back in March and April where you start looking at the exact same nest to see how many of those occupied nests are active, whether they have a chick or they have failed. So that was what my colleagues and I were doing. And we traveled all across Rajasthan and Madhya Pradesh. That was our area. This is a very nice area in just outside Kota in Rajasthan. It is the Chambal River. It is a beautiful gorge. And the vultures nest on the cliffs over there. So we would get in a boat and you can see I have this big file over here and they had photographs of the cliffs. And we would mark every single nest that we found with a code. It was A102, 103. So with the use of the telescope, you're able to look at every single nest, and you can say whether there's a bird that's incubating or it's got a chick. We were able to record nests all across. So we started from Kota, and I'll talk about some other areas that we went to. This is Bandhavgarh National Park in Madhya Pradesh. Again, these are huge cliffs, and wherever there are these cliffs, there are these wonderful ledges where these vultures nest on. So they're like, these cliffs are like magnets, not only for vultures, but other birds of prey like Bonelli's eagles, peregrine falcons, owls. Fantastic place to see a lot of raptors. And of course, India, for me, it was very special because in some of these places like Bandhavgarh and Ranthambore National Park, I got an opportunity to bump into tigers, and it's just a very special animal to be able to look at. So that was one of the allures of going to these areas as well. So we looked in protected areas, and we also counted nests outside in the agricultural areas, in places in the Vindhya range and the Kemo range in Bandhavgarh. And just a wonderful experience. We knew exactly where we would go. We would count our birds and go back and start tallying them up. And our entire survey would take about 3 weeks. Nilimaji mentioned about Orcha. Again, just a really beautiful places. These are the cenotaphs over there and the vulture's nest here. We counted about 30 breeding pairs when we first started in Orcha. I think it was in 2004. But there was a lot of renovation work that was taking place. And every time the renovation would take place, the vultures would get disturbed. And so we decided not to use the data that we collected here because we couldn't control for whether the birds died from diclofenac or whether they were just, they were cleaning these areas and the birds were disturbed. So even though we collected the data, we didn't use them in our final analysis. Here's just a picture of a vulture, again, on one of the ledges on these beautiful monuments in Orcha. And you can see this greenery that they bring regularly on the nest. It's a way to keep the nests moist. It's also considered as an insect repellent that keeps parasites away from the chicks. So here are the results now. We started our work in 2002, 2003, but it was not until 2006 that we were able to get a big enough sample size to start making comparisons from year to year. But what you can see here is if we draw a trend line, this is from 2007 all the way to 2016, we counted anywhere between 400 to 500 nests, occupied nests. Now remember, these were the only ones that were occupied. We probably counted more than 2,500 nests. A lot of those were empty, but the positive sign was that it was pretty stable. There wasn't any evidence that the population was crashing. We believe this is attributed to the ban in veterinary diclofenac, the awareness that was created to have veterinary officers not use diclofenac when they were administering painkillers to livestock. And of course, our South African friends, with the help of the RSPB and the BNHS, were able to show that another non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug called meloxicam was as effective as diclofenac, but did not cause vultures to die. However, I want to show this because from 2012 until 2016, we noticed that the vulture population was showing some small decline over there. And we looked at that and we split that into the two, into the two different states. Now, I hope this graph is not very complicated, but I will try and explain it. If you look at the top graph, the blue area here shows the trend of vultures from 2012 until 2016. And that's in Madhya Pradesh. And you can see it's fairly stable. But if we looked at Rajasthan from 2012 until 2015, it dropped quite dramatically. Now, We don't know why that population dropped from 200 down to 140 pairs. So we lost 60 breeding pairs. Whether they moved to other areas, we don't know. Whether they migrated, we don't know. Whether they died of diclofenac, it's very hard to say. But we started doing some research on what were the changes that took place in Rajasthan at the time to understand if we could figure out why this population dropped. I'll skip this one because that's a bit complicated. But what we found out is that in 2012, the government of Rajasthan began a free medical scheme where they were distributing free veterinary drugs and free human drugs to everybody in Rajasthan. Now, it is very likely that because people knew diclofenac was an effective drug, it is very likely that because these drugs were free, that they might have been used on livestock. Now, we have no evidence that this is the case, but it's very circumstantial. And this, of course, for any researchers out there, my challenge to you is to understand whether this is the case. You know, what happened in Rajasthan at that time? Were people using these drugs, the diclofenac, on livestock, and was this causing the decline? As I say, we have no evidence for this. It's entirely circumstantial. We stopped doing our surveys in 2017 because my role changed at the Peregrine Fund, and I was focusing more on my work in Africa on vultures there, because that was a far severe problem with retaliatory poisoning. But my colleagues in India keep me informed that populations continue to be relatively stable, and in some places they have gone up. So the conclusion basically from my study was that in the numbers of Indian vultures in the state of Rajasthan were starting to decline. And really, you know, one of the beauty about science is the more questions you ask, the more questions you still have to answer and unravel. We were still finding some dead vultures. We just don't know what was causing that. So I'm gonna shift gears a little bit and take you to Nepal, where my colleagues and I were involved in a study of Himalayan vultures. The Himalayan vulture is the largest of the gyps vultures in the world. And we wanted to understand whether these big vultures that live in the high mountains of the Himalayas were being affected. These are the areas where they are non-breeding. This is their breeding range all across the Himalayan mountains into Tibet and China as well. I was very fortunate in being able to do some of these surveys high up in the Annapurnas, really beautiful areas. And we would walk every day from 8 in the morning till 5 in the evening, counting every single vulture that we saw and other birds of prey. And we were then able to write down an index of how many vultures we saw per day and measure that over time. So to give you an idea, this is how the graph looked like when we started in 2002 until 2006. The population was, we were seeing about 10 to 15 vultures a day. And then we had a huge gap because we were focusing our efforts elsewhere. We started those surveys again in 2013, and we noticed that the vulture population went significantly higher. Why those numbers went high, we don't know. We believe a lot of it is because of our friends, Bird Conservation Nepal and Himalayan Nature, and all the other organizations that are involved there in developing vulture safe zones. This may have had a tremendously positive effect on vulture numbers over there. These are some of the autumn migrations that Tulsi, my colleague, was doing up in a place called Tulkarka, south of the Annapurnas. Just to give you an idea, from 2012 until 2020, and basically the numbers still seem relatively stable. And this counts the number of Himalayan vultures that passed through this site during an autumn migration. The gentleman on the left here with the green sweater, he's Dr. Tulsi Subedi, and this is Sandesh. one of his colleagues, and they were able to capture some Himalayan vultures during their migration studies, and they were able to deploy transmitters on these birds to study their migration routes, wintering areas, and see where these birds go, because this was very novel information. You can see they put a transmitter here on their back. And the movements you get from some of these vultures are very fascinating because they travel long distances. So you can see these birds were tagged here in Nepal. You can see one bird went north all the way to China, then came back, and then went all the way down to Uttar Pradesh, just south of Lucknow. One bird went west into the western part of Nepal, and this one bird went all across very far, into China. So each bird had different movement patterns, and I think that's one of the challenges that these birds have, that they travel long distances. So if you're able to solve the diclofenac problem in India and Nepal, and say Pakistan, but if these birds are flying into China and they're using diclofenac over there, then you still have a problem. And that's why getting collaborations and partnerships with people working on vultures across a wider area is really the most expedient and practical way to go. Dr. Subedi, also, one of the things that the Peregrine Fund does, and we're really proud of, is we invest in conservation leadership around the world. So just like the Peregrine Fund supported my graduate studies to become a raptor biologist, we supported Dr. Tulsi Subedi's studies in Nepal, where he worked on the bearded vulture. This is an incredibly large, charismatic vulture that feeds almost entirely on bones. This is a bird that you see flying high up on the mountaintops. It carries bones on in its beak, and then it drops these bones on rocks, and then feeds on the fragments. This is a gourmet meal for it. Dr. Subedi was able to capture 13 bearded vultures and put transmitters on them and study their movements and look at what threats these birds had. I'm not going to talk much about these because this might be very complicated, but in a nutshell, if you look at the red, what's known as the minimum convex polygon, it just tells you the areas that these birds use, and the more concentrated areas tells you where the birds spend a lot more of their time. So some really good information there. But what Tulsi found was that in addition to diclofenac, there were many other threats that these birds were facing. One of that was the use of pesticides and the use of poisons to get rid of mammalian carnivores like feral dogs and jackals. Basically, they poison these animals because they take livestock, and then the vultures find these carcasses and they come and feed on them, and then they die of poisoning. So it's a real threat. It's happening in a place like Assam, and if we have time, I'll talk a little bit more about that. The other threat to these vultures, other than diclofenac, is from electrocution. A lot of India and a lot of the developing world is expanding rapidly to meet the growing needs of a rapidly growing human population. Obviously, electricity is a big part of that. But if these power lines are designed in a way that a bird sits here and its wings touch two of these conductors, it's going to get electrocuted. So that is a big problem. And so for those researchers who are sitting over there, I urge you to take a more critical look into this issue, because if you walk under these power lines, you will find dead birds if they are not bird friendly. It is a silent killer. Many birds are not found because once they die, other scavengers like jackals and dogs take them away and they eat them. There's also human persecution. Many kids and people, they trap and shoot and kill these birds purely out of ignorance. They just don't know. There may be stories of fear. These birds will take you away. Of course, that's not true. They just use catapults and slingshots. So, creating the awareness and the education for these children, which is what you are doing over here, and I commend you on that, so that the children, as they grow into society, they have a better understanding of the value of these birds. Virtually every single animal that I know, including the vulture, is ingrained in Hindu mythology, is ingrained in Islam as well. And so, it is our moral obligation that we protect these animals, and we spread the word, especially to our children, on why these birds are so important and why we should not kill them. So looking ahead, Dr. Subedi has outlined some of these steps that we need to do. Obviously, education and awareness to the communities to promote vulture and other raptors as an important part of ecosystem services. One of the things that Tulsi is looking to do is provide an alternative livelihood support to mitigate these poisoning cases. Some of the vulture restaurants that you talked about earlier can become really good tourist sites where tourists come and photograph these birds, and they can provide the revenue that is needed to these communities so that they can, start to maintain that and then use that revenue to uplift their livelihoods. Of course, working with the power line companies to make sure that the power lines that they build are bird friendly and they don't kill birds. And over time, develop a network of community leaders all across the larger area, whether it's Nepal, India, Bangladesh, all these places. So you're all talking to each other. And I know the Vulture Center in Pinjore is doing a fantastic job, as is the people in Nepal, because they've just released some of their birds. And there's a lot of PR and positive social media work that's coming out from there. This is Dikpal, one of my friends and colleagues from Nepal, and he spends a lot of his time up in the high mountains, talking to these kids about the importance of vultures, vulture identification, why they're important, and why we should protect them. And this is really, I think educational awareness is something that is overlooked. And people want to focus on the research and the science because it's more exciting, but education is a very important part to generate the awareness that is required to safeguard these birds. And not only these birds, but all the other biodiversity as well. Birds of prey are considered top predators, and they offer an umbrella of protection. So if you protect the top predators, then you can be assured that all the other animals that occur below in that food chain will be protected as well. I don't know how much time I have, Nilimaji, but maybe I should stop there if there are any questions, because there are some slides I have about vulture poisoning in Assam and some of the issues that kite flying and the use of kites is affecting vultures as well.
So you can take as much time as you want. My people here would not get this opportunity again and again. So please feel free. The time constraint would be on your side because I know it's very late for you. But for us, it's during daytime. That's okay.
All right. Well, I'm happy to go on. And so I want to talk about some of the work that my colleagues from the Wildlife Trust of India are doing. This is a project that's run by a dear friend of mine, Dr. Vivek Menon, and in conjunction with the international, with IFO and the Assam Forest Department. Now, over the last 20 years in Assam, there has been a tremendous concern over the use of poisoning that is primarily targeted for killing dogs and other wild carnivores. So what happens is they try to poison these other animals, but hundreds of vultures get poisoned instead. And a lot of these are Himalayan vultures, griffon vultures, and the slender-billed vultures, which is probably the rarest of the vultures in India. And they've been collecting data since 2003, average about 61 dead birds per year. But you can see in 2015, they had a spike of about 208 dead birds. But overall, the trend is growing, that there's an increasing trend of vultures that are getting poisoned. And something really needs to be done about this, is creating a rapid response team, is creating the awareness on the ground, and really finding solutions to prevent these dogs and other animals from attacking livestock and children as well, because this is a serious issue. The Wildlife Trust of India team, they've rescued, until now, they've rescued about 140 birds. A lot of these birds are showing signs of acute poisoning. The vast majority of these birds are migratory juvenile birds from the Himalayas, mainly the Himalayan vulture. Some of these birds respond to treatment as well. And then, they're able to release them as well. But, when you release a bird, you need to understand where it goes. And so, we're trying, one of the things I'm encouraging them is to try and find transmitters to put on these birds to see whether the release is working. This is some of the stuff that they do. And, perhaps the most important thing here is involving the local communities in Assam, because, this is ultimately a problem that is affecting the communities over there. And they need to feel ownership of this project. And so if by involving the communities there, that's a really good outreach mechanism. And hopefully the idea is that will prevent other people from poisoning. It is still a serious issue, and there's still a long way that needs to go to try and solve this. My colleagues and friends from Gujarat, Aditya Roy and others who I hope they've joined in, but they do a fantastic job there. The Uttarayan Kite Flying Festival takes place every year in January. Of course, it's culturally embedded in Indian tradition to fly these kites. But it's a big problem because these birds fly into these kites. They fly into the kite strings, and hundreds of birds get injured. And then they have volunteers that come in and help them. And a lot of these birds are unreleasable. So, it's a big problem. And they're doing their best to try and solve it, because many people use the manja strings that are glass coated, and they cause injuries to almost 3,000 birds in the month of January only in Ahmedabad. So you can imagine all across Gujarat how many birds are being killed. Over that time, between 2009 and 2013, they rescued 53 white-rumped vultures. Now, this is the time you can imagine that these birds have chicks in the nest. So if these birds get injured, there's no way the parent can go back into the nest to feed the birds. So in addition to the diclofenac, in addition to the poisoning, this is one of the problem that needs to be solved as well. And it's only adding to the stress on the vulture population there. Pesticides is also a problem. Pesticides are used to kill wild boar, feral dogs, and nilgai. They use phorates, and vultures, of course, start to feed on these pesticides, and then they die as well. So I guess, the question on everybody's mind is, this was called the Asian vulture crisis. Is the crisis over? So here are my thoughts, that the Oriental white-backed vulture in Pakistan had completely disappeared prior to the ban. In the Punjab province, they have completely disappeared and they haven't come back yet. So that's a big problem. But if you compare the pre-ban rates of diclofenac with the Indian vulture in Pakistan, India, and Nepal, the decline has definitely stopped. So there is a hint of recovery. The population has started to stabilize. In some places, they're going up. But having said that, you have all these other problems of pesticide use, of kite flying, and of poisoning as well, which is a serious issue. I think the conservation community can claim success, especially in areas where individual appears to have been stable. But we're not out of the forest yet. We still don't know about whether birds have come in or other species have moved out, and the abundance is still low. We are far from those 1970 levels in those first photographs that I showed you, where there were 100,000, 200,000 vultures in one particular area. I don't think you want to get to that level because that became a serious hazard, especially for aircraft as well. 65% of all the planes that were hit by birds, it was vultures that crashed into them. So the reason for this success is manifold. I think a lot of research was done, particularly in Pakistan, to identify diclofenac as the main cause. And then our colleagues in India and Nepal then took that to the government level and were able to get it banned. So there was a lot of teamwork and collaboration. There was a lot of goodwill and political commitment from the governments in all these countries that resulted in the ban. And again, I stress this, if that ban did not happen, you would probably not have any vultures in that part of the world now. And you would be seeing the impacts of that, health-wise in many different ways that are unthinkable, especially during a time of pandemic right now. By 2008, the diclofenac contamination in carcasses had fallen substantially. So Dr. Prakash and his colleagues were randomly collecting samples of dead animals across northwest, south, and east India, and were measuring for diclofenac residue. And that had dropped, which showed that the use of diclofenac on livestock had dropped substantially, which correlates with the stabilizing and increase of these vultures in certain areas. Of course, there were major education efforts by a lot of non-NGOs and government departments, including the vets and pharmacies, to make sure that veterinary diclofenac was not used on livestock. And of course, the RSPB and the BNHS have developed these vulture safe zones all across Nepal and India as well. So that has helped a lot. Of course, there are a lot of challenges. As I said, we're not out of the forest as yet. We still have to tread carefully. Diclofenac is still available. It's the same drug that's being used on humans, and some people do use it on livestock. There's an increase of other veterinary drugs like aceclofenac, ketoprofen, nimelucide, and these are highly toxic to vultures. These drugs have not been banned, and there are new drugs coming in the market every single day, and we just don't know what impacts they have on vultures. The other biggest challenge is that vulture conservation needs a lot of money. You cannot achieve conservation if you don't have resources. And in an area where tigers and elephants and rhinos are very popular, if you ask most Americans where they would like to give their money, they would give it to tigers and elephants and rhinos. So, convincing donors to become partners and provide the resources for vulture conservation is very, very difficult. We stress also that these vultures need to be monitored as well. So scientific research needs to go on. If you have vultures around your area in close to the Punjab, get a small team together and start monitoring them, because India is a big country. There's not enough scientists, and start talking to other scientists who are working on this. We know very little about slender-billed vultures or king vultures or Egyptian vultures. And keep in mind that there are other threats as well. India is the 5th largest producer of wind energy in the world now, and wind farms are lethal at killing birds. These birds go straight into the wind farms, and then they're cut in half, and that's a big problem as well. I would be remiss if I didn't mention about the SAVE partnership. This is a collaboration of many organizations. It's called SAVE, and it's SAVE, Saving Asia's Vultures from Extinction. It was created in 2011, primarily led by the RSPB and the Bombay Natural History Society. And it's got all these different partners across the world, across India, Nepal, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Cambodia, that are working very hard every year to come up with a blueprint and an action plan to make sure that the vultures continue to thrive and soar in the Indian subcontinent. There are 24 partners across these 6 countries. They have a blueprint and a recovery plan, which is in detail by all partners. It is a living document that is updated annually in consultation in an annual meeting in November. The Peregrine Fund is very proud to be a partner of the SAVE consortium. You can go to this website called save-vultures.org and you can download that document. It is very clear and it gives you a very good outline of what is being done year to year. These are some of the releases. You know, as you know, there was a captive breeding center in Nepal. There's one very close to you in Pinjore. There's another one in Assam. The ones in Nepal released some of their birds, and these are some of the movement patterns. And you will find all that information on that website as well. And this is the action plan that was set in 2025, and it's up for review that was launched in 2020, and it is up for review in 2025, and it's funded by the ministry. The Ministry of Environment and Forest is a major player in this, and I really commend the Indian government and the partnerships that are taking place over there to make sure that these vultures continue to do better and their populations increase. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. And I hope you really enjoyed that, and I hope it gave you the information. I was asked to speak slowly, and I realized I was maybe supposed to have said a few words in Hindi, but I apologize. I get very into this talk, and it's very close to me in my heart, because my grandfather was born in India, and then he moved to Kenya when he was 10 years old. So I feel very connected with India. And I'm very proud to tell people that I'm also Indian. So I want to thank you all for giving me this opportunity to talk with you about this work. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir, for making a captivating presentation on these unique and misunderstood creatures, and sharing with us various initiatives being taken to save them. Now we'll be taking questions from the participants. Those who have questions, please raise your hands. Participants can also inbox us the questions.
There was a hand raised by Mr. Yash Chandola. Yash, are you there? He's not there.
No, he's not there now.
I was also told that we have Usha Lachungpa. Maybe she wants to ask a question. Usha is formerly from BNHS. Usha, are you there?
Yes, I'm there, but I'm muted.
You are muted. Oh, please unmute everybody.
She's unmuted, ma'am.
Hello, Muneer. Hello, can you hear me?
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, how valid is the release of vultures when we are across the range? We are not able to tackle the stray and free-ranging dog issue, because as long as that is, these dogs are attacking livestock, and there is going to be retaliatory poisoning, and there is a law about in the Indian system about not killing dogs. So that is creating a problem, and we know these problems are there, but still we are planning release of the vultures in captivity, because we can't keep them in captivity forever. So how do we deal with the problem of the free-range dogs?
So let me understand the question. Is obviously feral dogs are a big problem because their numbers are rapidly growing. There is a law about you can't kill these dogs because I guess the goodwill of all Indian people towards all animals and all life. I don't have an answer for that, just because we face the same problem in Kenya, where livestock are being killed by predators like lions and hyenas. We're not able to kill lions and hyenas, but we're able to develop teams of what we're calling a vulture protection network. And these networks are built, they communicate with one another using WhatsApp on their cell phones. And when there is a poisoning, they respond rapidly to this poisoning event. So in the past, at these poisoning incidences, maybe 60, 70 vultures would die. But because there's a network of people that are on the ground, they're able to respond so rapidly to the poisoning. So maybe 1 or 2 vultures will die, but they've still saved 60 or 70 vultures. So it's not a long-term, it's not a stopgap measure, but it's a way to reduce it. We're not killing lions and we're not killing hyenas or leopards, but I think working with the communities, it's these communities that need to come up with these solutions. We can't go there and say, this is what you should do. I think developing that trust, building that trust with the communities, identifying where these areas of poisoning hotspots are with the dogs, engaging with governments and figuring it out. I mean, yeah, it's a really difficult question, and I'm afraid I don't have the answer for that.
I wanted to add actually that it wasn't really the poisoning as such that I was referring to, but the population of the free-ranging dogs. I mean, I've been told that they are not to be killed because they do enjoy human company and they hang around the military camps, and so they are free-ranging dogs and stray dogs, and they are actually competing with the vultures. So the vultures' food source is being taken away by these free-ranging dogs, which are running around in packs. So isn't the availability of food going to be a major factor when we are planning release of captive bred vultures who are used to being fed in captivity?
Yeah, I have to admit that my last visit I made to India primarily for these monitoring work was in 2017. So it's been a while. I know that there places like in South Africa and of course in Nepal, they have these vulture feeding stations, which they call vulture restaurants. And that's what we did in Pakistan, where you release the birds and you ensure that they have a safe source of food that is diclofenac free. I'm not greatly involved with the release program in India, and that's probably a question for one of the people that's directly involved in that. I think so. One of the things that we do with the California condor is we release these birds out there, knowing that hunters are still using lead ammunition. And that's the main problem killing California condors, is they're feeding on dead animals that have been shot with lead bullets. The lead fragments into their bodies and then they get lead poisoning. But we have learned a lot. And so by releasing those birds that you have bred in captivity and putting them out there, and understanding those causes of mortality will prepare you in a better way, in a more scientific way, to tackle the real threats. It'll give you an indication of how these threats vary in different areas. I hope that makes sense.
Okay, we have a question from Sherlyn Bist. Sherlyn, please unmute yourself.
Yes, ma'am. Ma'am, I am a student from class 6 from Army Public School, and I have a question that what role do vultures play in maintaining nature's ecological balance?
That's a very good question. And I commend you on asking that question. Vultures have been around for a very, very long time, far earlier than humans. And they play a very important role in maintaining the balance in nature because they are designed to feed on dead animals. Now, they come in big numbers. And so if they see a dead cow or a dead buffalo or a dead nilgai or a dead cheetal, they have the capacity and the capability of rapidly eating that carcass so that it does not rot and it does not create an arena for bacteria and other pathogenic organisms that are likely to spread. So one of my colleagues in Kenya did a study where she looked at the role of vultures at a carcass and the role of vultures not at a carcass. She put a carcass underneath a tree where vultures were not able to go. And she saw, and with a camera, she was able to see that dogs and hyenas and other animals were coming there and they were touching one another. And then they were going back into the villages where they would mix with livestock and domestic dogs. And really, there is a tremendous potential to spread disease. They also recycle nutrients because they feed on the animals. And then when they poop, those nutrients go back into the soil. And become fertilizer. So they provide this service that is absolutely free. And we have to be very, very aware that we make sure that they're around for the next million years, as long as humans are on the planet.
Okay, next question is from Mr. S.S. Saini. Mr. Saini, please unmute yourself.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good evening from my side.
Sir, as a diclofenac is very harmful for the vulture, is it very difficult to ban in India diclofenac?
I think it's difficult. I don't think you want to ban diclofenac completely because it's a very effective drug for humans. I mean, I take it if I have pain. It's a multi-million-dollar industry. It's good for healthcare if it's not abused. My understanding is many people overdose. They take a lot of diclofenac and it can cause kidney failure in humans. But it has been banned for use in veterinary livestock industry. Also, there used to be big multi-dose vials and now they've made them into very small vials as well. So, a lot of conservation depends on awareness and changing people's behavior, right? There will be other drugs as well. And, that can be used. And diclofenac is, in its sense, it's a painkiller. It's not going to cure whatever the cow or the buffalo or the goat is suffering from. So the Indian government and Nepal and Pakistan, they banned the drug, but only the veterinary diclofenac. It's still the same drug, the human drug. So, if a livestock farmer wanted to inject his cattle with diclofenac, he could buy the human form. I don't think it is practical to ban it for humans.
Okay, the next question is from Dr. Satnam Singh Laddar. Sir, please unmute yourself.
Good morning, everyone. This is an interesting talk by the expert. I think everyone is worried about the trend the vulture has taken with the having ecological backlash all over the state of Punjab and other areas. But so many steps are being taken by various agencies. My question is, how soon can the vulture regain its lost glory with the present trend of conservation efforts by the global scientists and even state governments. Can you please do you have any trend analysis done with the current efforts? Can it regain ever lost glory?
That's again a very good question. I think you have to be very practical in terms of its lost glory. I don't think, from a very personal view, I don't think you want your vulture numbers to go back to the same numbers they were in 1971 or 1972. Just because the Indian landscape around India and Pakistan, you've got far more humans, you've got far more people, you've got more development, you've got more power lines, you've got more wind farms, right? You have less food for the vultures as well, because now in places like southern India, if an animal drops dead, it's taken away, it's buried. Those numbers in the early 70s and the late 60s were primarily because there were all these carcass dump sites. When a cow died, the chambars came and took the skin away in these areas where they were dumped, and the vultures did well. They were, in my opinion, they were a super abundant population in the first place. So it was, in my opinion, it was artificially inflated. That is not normal to have those many vultures. They were there because there was a lot of food and people were not killing them. So I think you can take pride as an Indian citizen that your government and the conservation community has done its best in preventing the extinction of this species. That is number one. Without a doubt, without that effort, the vultures would have gone extinct. So we've crossed that first hurdle. The government banned veterinary diclofenac. There's a lot of effort. You can see there's 24 partners that are involved in the SAVE consortium, and they are working tirelessly to make sure that the vultures don't go extinct. These are, you have to understand also, these are very long-lived birds. They take 5 to 6 years to become sexually mature. Then they attempt their first breeding, which will almost always fail. It's going to take a lot of time. It is going to take patience. Conservation takes time, and probably, your children or maybe your grandchildren will see them in good numbers. And that is, I hope, because there is a lot of effort and there's a lot of blood, sweat, tears, and money that has been poured into vulture conservation, and a lot of sacrifices as well. So I hope that answers your question. Look at it as a glass that is half full and not half empty.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Really good one.
Okay. The next question is from Mr. Roshan Kumar Pal. Sir, please unmute yourself.
Thank you, ma'am. My name is Roshan Kumar Pal. Thank you, ma'am. My name is Roshan Kumar Pal, and I'm from class 8th, APS Clementown. I have to ask, sir, sir, we, the humans, can create a drug that won't affect the vultures if they fed on an animal that was once treated from that drug.
Roshan, can you repeat your question, please?
Yes, sir. My question is that we, the humans, can create a drug that won't affect the vultures if they breed on the animal that was once treated from that drug.
Yes, there is a drug called meloxicam. It is, so these drugs, painkillers, are called they're in a class of drugs. They're called non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. They are taken when you have an inflammation or you have a pain in your muscle, and if you have fever as well. So our colleagues at the Bombay Natural History Society and the RSPB, with support from our friends in South Africa, were able to test one particular drug called meloxicam. And they took meloxicam, they treated a cow or a buffalo, they treated an animal with it. And then when that animal died, they fed it to vultures. and the vultures survived. And that showed that that particular drug is vulture safe. And, you know, it's still more expensive than diclofenac, and it's, you know, it's got other issues around it, but it works well. And many farmers are using it, livestock farmers. And, you know, we have the ability, and maybe one day, Roshan, you will create a drug when you grow up, and you will save more and more vultures. So don't lose hope.
Okay, the next question is from Nilesh. Nilesh, please unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you, Muneer, for the great presentation. I have two questions. One is, sorry, my name is Saya and I work at UNEP currently. I have two questions. One is, how are you seeing the climate crisis affecting vultures? And the second one is, what are your thoughts on the issue that we have pushed the ecosystems to the brink, that we need to not only conserve and protect, but also restore their habitat to avoid extinction? Thank you.
Okay, first of all, Nilesh and Sai, really good. I'm so glad you guys were able to join this, this talk. Really good to hear from you guys. Climate change is obviously a big, big issue, and we have only just scratched the surface. What my colleagues are doing right now is, at the Peregrine Fund, we have developed a phone app that is able to get location data. It's a very ambitious project to get location data for every single bird of prey around the world. We're able to use those data into some modeling techniques where we can project the worst case climate scenarios to see what the impacts of those populations will be. Those species that are high altitude and restricted range, like the bearded vulture, they will suffer tremendously because they rely on these high altitudes. A prey base will suffer as well. And you know, we're still trying to understand the impacts of climate change on a lot of these birds of prey as well. Whether it affects hormones, whether it affects physiology, you know, we don't know. Certainly those birds that are migratory, you know, it affects their timing of migration, whether they leave and when they come back as well. Your second question about humans pushing this planet to the brink of extinction. You know, a lot of it depends on people like doing these awareness programs that you know, the Pushpa Gujal Science City has done. It's reaching out to people in the rural areas, reaching out to the younger generation as well, and creating that awareness is creating champions and investing in conservation leaders. The more we are aware about our planet, the more we're aware about nature, the more we are aware about the consequences of losing biodiversity, you know, then we can make a change. And it's up to every single one of us to make that change and make this planet a better place.
Great, thank you so much. That's really interesting to hear.
Thank you, Saya.
Now the last question is from Mr. Dipanshu.
Yes, sir. Good evening, sir. I am Dipanshu from class 6. Sir, my question is, sir, what is the importance of transmitting culture?
The importance of transmitting culture?
Yes, sir.
I'm not sure I understand your question, Dipanshu. That is a really good question. And I think, I hope I can answer it. But if I understand your question, you're trying to ask me what is the role of culture in terms of transmitting culture?
Yes, sir. Sir.
So vultures, you know, vultures are are very part and parcel of a lot of cultures. If you look at the Native Americans, they revered vultures as well. There are nomadic cultures in Africa, like the Maasai, and I had a student who studied the perceptions and attitudes of Maasai people on vultures. And again, a lot of these people use the signs and the cues of vultures. They use their feathers to make arrows. They use their feathers to make decorative headgear for their traditional use. They look at vultures to find some of their lost cattle. Vultures are very important in Indian culture as well. We talked earlier about Jatayu and the role that Jatayu played in saving Sita from getting kidnapped by Ravan. In Tibetan culture as well, they have these sky burials where your loved ones, after they depart us, are, in high altitudes like Tibet, there's no firewood, so you cannot cremate. The ground is very hard, so you cannot bury people. So they leave their loved ones, their departed ones, to the vultures, and it's supposed to be very eco-friendly. Vultures have been ingrained in culture. I mean, some of the first drawings of vultures have been found over 10,000 years ago in caves in Turkey. There's a 40,000-year-old fossil of a flute that has been made by early hominids, of a griffin vulture that was found in Germany. So I really hope I understood your question, and I hope I answered it in the way you want. And if you have other questions, Nilima ji has my email. You can email me those questions, and I'd be happy to answer them. It's just gone past midnight over here. And so if you will excuse me, maybe I'll take one last question if there is, or if not, and I just want to thank you all for your time.
Okay. No, sir, there are no more questions. Now I request Dr. Rajesh Grover to propose vote of thanks. Sir, please.
Good morning, and well, it's an honor to propose a vote of thanks. And I would like to extend my heartfelt thanks to Dr. Muneer Virani, who is the Executive Vice President at Peregrine Fund, World Center for Birds of Prey in the United States, for delivering a talk on saving the Asian vulture at the occasion of this International Biodiversity Day. So you gave detailed explanation on a decline in vulture population in India, Nepal, and Pakistan, and shared research initiatives, and rightly emphasized education awareness, need to adopt vulture protection initiatives, and sharing conservation strategies to be adopted to restore vulture population in South Asia. Please accept our thanks, Dr. Virani, and for your enlightening talk, and as well as for sparing your valuable time, that too in the late, I must say it's midnight as per MDT time zone in the United States. And I also take this opportunity to express my gratefulness to our worthy Director General, Dr. Nilima Jairath, for her presence, sharing her views, as well as inspiring mentorship to conduct this webinar. And I also acknowledge the support received from all my colleagues at Science City who have been associated with us directly or indirectly to organize this webinar. And I would like to convey my sincere thanks to all of them to make this event a success. And last but not the least, I'm also thankful to all the participants, especially guests and experts from BNHS for sparing time, being on board, and making it a very interactive session on this platform. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir.
Before we leave, Dr. Virani, I would just like to let you know, I had talked to Dr. Vibhu Prakash. In fact, he had called me up to say he would be able to join today, but he is down with COVID. And while we were having the talk, I got a message from him that he was not able to join because he was not feeling very well. So we wish him very good health and a very speedy recovery. I also tried to contact Dr. Asad Rahmani yesterday, but somehow could not get through his call. But I was expecting to see him here. But I'm sure I'll get a call from him sometime during the day today, and whatever message is there, I will convey it to you. And it has really been a wonderful, wonderful talk. It is really great of you to have accepted our invitation at a short notice. Thank you very, very much for being with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank Ankit Mehta, if he's here. Thank you for introducing me to you and giving me the opportunity.
I am not sure if Ankit is there. He has had certain mishaps in the family, so I don't know whether you know about that or not, but I'm not sure whether he's there today.
He's there, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Muneer. Thank you, Nilimaji.
He's here.
He's here. Oh.
Yes, ma'am, he's here.
Good, Ankit. Good to know that you are there. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Namaste. I'll take your leave.
Thank you so much and wish you a very good night.